February 9th, 1944, North Atlantic, 280 nautical miles west of Ireland, the ping echoed through the steel hull of HMS Starling, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Leading Seaman Tommy Fletcher pressed his headphones tighter against his ears, his eyes closed in concentration as he listened to the returning echo from the deep. The sound was different this time, not the false return of a thermocline layer or a school of fish. This was solid. This was steel. This was a U-boat. Fletcher's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the intercom switch. Not from fear. He had been hunting submarines for 18 months now, but from the electric anticipation that came with contact. ASDIC contact, sir. Bearing 270, range 1,800 yards, moving target. Submarine confirmed. His voice was steady, professional, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through his veins. On the bridge above, Captain Frederic John Walker, Johnny to his men, allowed himself the ghost of a smile. His legendary second support group had been at sea for 9 days, prowling the western approaches like wolves hunting wolves. They had already sunk one U-boat on this patrol. Now Fletcher had found them. Another, the date, would become famous in naval history. By the time the sun set on February the 9th, 1944, Walker's group would achieve what no other Allied force had accomplished: the destruction of 3 German U-boats in a single 15-hour action. But standing in the cramped ASDIC compartment, deep in Starling's hull, surrounded by the hum of electronic equipment and the ever-present smell of oil and sweat, Fletcher knew only that he had a job to do. The most important job in the ship, perhaps in the entire Battle of the Atlantic. Because without the ASDIC operator's ears, without his ability to interpret the pings and echoes bouncing through thousands of feet of cold seawater, the ship was blind. The convoy was vulnerable. The war could be lost. Fletcher had joined HMS Starling in April 1943, part of the ship's original complement, when she became flagship of the newly formed Second Support Group. He had been trained at HMS Osprey, the anti-submarine school at Portland, where instructors had drummed into him the physics of underwater sound propagation, the art of distinguishing true contacts from false, the absolute necessity of maintaining focus during attacks that could last for hours or even days, but no training could fully prepare a man for the reality of hunting submarines under Captain Walker's command. Walker was obsessed with killing U-boats. He had spent the early years of the war in frustration, his talents unrecognized, passed over for promotion, while less capable officers advanced. Now given command of 6 sloops freed from convoy escort duty to hunt U-boats wherever they could be found, he had become the most lethal anti-submarine commander in naval history. Walker had revolutionized U-boat hunting with tactical innovations that turned the hunters into the hunted. His creeping attack used one ship to hold ASDIC contact while directing another to approach at silent speed. So slowly the U-boat's hydrophone operators couldn't hear the approaching threat until depth charges were already falling around them. His plaster method involved multiple ships making repeated attacks, giving the submarine no respite, no chance to surface, no opportunity to recharge batteries or replenish oxygen. Walker would hunt a U-boat for 30 hours if necessary, driving it deeper and deeper until the crew's oxygen ran out and they were forced to surface into a storm of gunfire. And at the heart of every hunt, every innovation, every kill were the ASDIC operators, men like Thomas Fletcher, whose trained ears could detect a submarine at ranges exceeding 2 miles, who could track its depth changes and evasive maneuvers, who could maintain contact through thermocline layers that bent sound waves in unpredictable directions. Walker trusted his ASDIC teams absolutely. He had personally overseen their additional training, drilling them relentlessly until they could hold contact in conditions other operators would have declared impossible. Now, on this cold February morning, with 3 U-boats operating in the area and convoys vulnerable to attack, Fletcher's skills would be tested as never before. The ping sounded again. The echo returned. The hunt had begun. What Fletcher and his shipmates aboard HMS Starling didn't know was that they were about to participate in one of the most devastating anti-submarine actions of the entire war, an action that would send shockwaves through the Kriegsmarine and convince German submarine commanders that the North Atlantic had become a graveyard from which there was no escape. The ASDIC compartment was Fletcher's kingdom, a cramped space barely 6 feet square, dominated by the Type 144 ASDIC set with its distinctive circular display screen and array of bakelite controls. The equipment was temperamental, requiring constant adjustment to compensate for water temperature, depth, sea state, and the thermal layers that could scatter sound waves like light through broken glass. Fletcher had learned to read the display like a book, interpreting the faint phosphorescent trace that represented the echo, judging distance and bearing with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural to those who didn't understand the science. But it was science, physics, combined with experience, technical skill enhanced by intuition, developed through hundreds of hours at sea. His training log showed 847 hours of active ASDIC operation since joining Starling. Every hour had taught him something new about the underwater world, about how sound behaved in the ocean's depths, about the signatures of different submarine types. He could distinguish a Type 7 U-boat from a Type 9 by the quality of the echo, could estimate depth by the return signal strength, could predict evasive maneuvers by subtle changes in the bearing rate. This knowledge, accumulated through endless practice and real combat, made him invaluable to Walker's hunting group. And today, all that experience would be needed. The first U-boat was UE-762, a Type 7C submarine under the command of Captain Lieutenant Hans Joachim Schwarz. She had been stalking convoy on 224, waiting for darkness to make a surface attack using her superior speed and lower profile. But the convoy had passed beyond her patrol area, and Schwarz had received orders to proceed to a new position further west. He had no idea that HMS Starling and 5 other submarine hunters were converging on his position, guided by high-frequency direction-finding fixes on his routine radio reports to U-boat headquarters in France. Fletcher's initial contact came at 8:47 hours. The range was long, 1,800 yards, but the echo was clean and strong. "Contact firm, sir," he reported, his voice carrying through the ship's intercom to the bridge where Walker stood studying the plot. "Bearing steady, range closing, estimate target speed 4 knots, depth approximately 200 feet. Walker's response was immediate. "Action stations, signal the group, contact, all ships close on Starling." The alarm bells rang throughout the ship. Men ran to their stations with the practiced efficiency of a crew that had done this dozens of times before. On the depth charge, racks at the stern, ratings prepared the drum-shaped weapons, setting their hydrostatic fuses to detonate at specified depths. In the operations room, officers marked Fletcher's contact on the plotting table, calculating approach angles and attack solutions, but Walker didn't attack immediately. That would have been the old way, the wasteful way that allowed experienced U-boat commanders to evade. Instead, he maneuvered Starling to maintain contact at a range of 2,000 yards, just far enough that U-762's hydrophone operator wouldn't realize the game was up. The other ships of the second support group, Wild Goose, Woodpecker, Kite, Wren, and Magpie, took up positions in a wide circle around the contact. Walker was setting a trap. Down in the ASDIC compartment, Fletcher maintained his concentration, reporting range and bearing updates every 30 seconds. His world had narrowed to the glowing display screen and the sounds in his headphones, the outgoing ping, the returning echo, the background noise of the sea. He could hear the U-boat's propellers now, a faint, rhythmic thrumming beneath the echo. 4 knots. The submarine was moving slowly, conserving battery power, her commander unaware that he had been found. At 09:23 hours, Walker ordered the first creeping attack. Wild Goose would be the attacking ship, approaching at just 5 knots, so slowly that her propeller noise would be barely audible to the U-boat's hydrophones. Starling would maintain ASDIC contact and guide Wild Goose onto the target by signal lamp, communicating in Morse code to maintain radio silence. It was a tactic that required perfect coordination between ASDIC operator, captain, and attacking ship. Fletcher's role was critical. He had to maintain continuous contact, compensate for any evasive maneuvers by the U-boat, and provide accurate range and bearing information right up to the moment of attack. Any loss of contact, any miscalculation, and Wild Goose would drop her depth charges harmlessly into empty ocean while the U-boat slipped away. Range 1,500 yards, bearing 268, target steady. Fletcher's updates were calm, methodical. On the bridge, Walker translated these coordinates into Morse code signals sent by lamp to Wild Goose, now creeping forward at 5 knots, with her ASDIC silent to avoid alerting the target. The minutes crawled by. 5 knots covered only 500 feet per minute, agonizingly slow when hunting a submarine that could crash dive to 600 feet if alarmed. Range 1,000 yards, bearing 267, target holding course and speed. Fletcher could sense the tension throughout the ship, could imagine Wild Goose's crew standing by their depth charge racks, ready to release on Walker's signal. This was the critical moment. Too early and the charges would explode too far from the target. Too late and the submarine might hear Wild Goose's approach and take evasive action. At 09:41 hours, with the range at 400 yards, Walker flashed the attack signal to Wild Goose. Depth charges tumbled from her stern racks and side throwers, 10 charges set to detonate at 250 and 350 feet, forming a 3-dimensional pattern designed to catch the submarine wherever she tried to hide. Fletcher heard them through his headphones, not the explosions themselves, but the chaos they created in the water, the multiple echoes and reverberations that temporarily blanked out his ASDIC display. For 60 seconds, he was blind, waiting for the water to settle, hoping the charges had found their mark. Then, as the echoes faded, he heard something new, a different sound. Metallic groaning, the distinctive crack of a pressure hull buckling under stress. Breaking up noises, sir. Fletcher's voice carried excitement despite his training. Target echo weakening. Multiple small echoes. Debris field. On the bridge, Walker allowed himself a tight smile, but he wasn't satisfied yet. U-boats were tough. Their pressure hulls could withstand tremendous punishment. He had seen submarines survive direct hits from depth charges, their crews enduring hours of attack before finally succumbing. Maintain contact on debris field, Walker ordered. All ships stand by for further attacks if necessary. For the next 30 minutes, Fletcher tracked the descending debris, listening for any sound that might indicate the submarine had survived and was attempting to escape, but the noises told their own story: rushing water, collapsing compartments, the final death throes of a steel cylinder crushed by the ocean's pressure. At 10:18 hours, a massive underwater explosions marked the end of U-762. Her batteries had shorted out, igniting hydrogen gas, and the resulting blast tore the submarine apart. 46 German sailors died instantly, their bodies entombed in twisted metal, sinking toward the ocean floor 3 miles below. Fletcher removed his headphones and rubbed his aching ears. One kill, but the action was far from over. The high-frequency direction-finding operators had detected 2 more U-boats in the area, both transmitting position reports to headquarters. Already plotting intercepts, planning the next hunt. For Fletcher and his fellow ASDIC operators, there would be no rest. The battle had only begun. The technique Walker had developed, this creeping attack that had just destroyed U-762, represented years of tactical evolution. War, ASDIC-equipped ships would race towards submarine contacts at high speed, dropping depth charges in patterns that rarely hit their target because the final seconds of the approach were conducted blind. ASDIC couldn't penetrate the turbulence directly ahead of a fast-moving ship, creating a dead zone that U-boat commanders learned to exploit. Identified this weakness and devised a solution: use 2 ships, one maintaining contact, while guiding another in slowly, silently, lethally. The tactic was devastatingly effective, but it required exceptional skill from the ASDIC operators who had to maintain perfect contact throughout the approach. Fletcher had practiced this coordination dozens of times, but each real attack brought new variables, new challenges that couldn't be anticipated in training exercises. Appeared on Fletcher's screen at 11:47 hours, barely 90 minutes after U-762's destruction. This contact was different: stronger echo, deeper depth, moving faster. New contact, sir. Bearing 315, range 2,200 yards, estimate depth 350 feet, speed 6 knots, classification submarine. Fletcher's voice was hoarse now. Years of continuous ASDIC operation had strained his concentration, but Walker's training had prepared him for exactly this scenario. The second support group never gave their crews rest during an action. You hunted until the enemy was destroyed or darkness forced you to break off. Rest came later, after victory. This was U-238, commanded by Horst Hepp, a veteran commander on his 3rd patrol. Distant depth charge explosions that killed U-762 and new British anti-submarine forces were in the area. He had taken his boat deep, ordered silent running, and hoped to slip away at slow speed. But Hepp didn't know about Fletcher's exceptional hearing, about the Type 144 ASDIC's improved range, about Walker's relentless tactical innovations. At 350 feet, U-238 was below the thermal layer that should have protected her from ASDIC detection. Water had eliminated the thermal barrier, leaving the submarine exposed to any competent operator. And Fletcher was far more than competent. Walker immediately signaled the group to take up hunting positions, but this time the hunt would be different. U-238 was deeper than U-762 had been, requiring depth charges set to 500 feet, the maximum setting for the standard weapon. The hydrostatic pressure was enormous, and even a near miss could crush a submarine's pressure hull, but the charges had to get close. Water's incompressibility meant that depth charge explosions were devastatingly effective within 20 feet of a target, but relatively harmless beyond 50 feet. Precision was everything, and precision depended entirely on Fletcher's ability to track the submarine's exact position. Range 1,900 yards, bearing 313, turning to port. New course estimated 270. Fletcher's updates reflected U-238's evasive maneuvers. Hep knew he had been detected now. His hydrophone operator had reported propeller noises from multiple ships converging on their position. The U-boat commander faced a terrible choice: remain deep and hope to evade, or crash dive even deeper to 600 feet or more, where his boat's pressure hull would be stressed to its design limits. Hep chose to evade. It was a fatal mistake. He wanted too many U-boats to fall for simple evasion tactics. He positioned his ships in a pattern that covered all possible escape routes, then ordered a new type of attack he called plaster: simultaneous depth charge attacks from multiple ships, creating an inescapable pattern of explosions. 3 hours, Starling, Wild Goose, and Woodpecker attacked together, dropping a total of 30 depth charges in a coordinated pattern that covered a rectangular area 400 yards long and 200 yards wide. Fletcher heard them detonating through his headphones, a thunderous drumroll of explosions that shook Starling's hull and sent vibrations through every rivet and weld. For 2 minutes, his ASDIC was useless, the water too disturbed to return clean echoes. As the turbulence subsided, he picked up the contact again. Still moving, still at 350 feet, the submarine had survived. But Fletcher could hear something else now, a change in the propeller noise. One of U-238's electric motors had been damaged. Her speed was dropping. She was wounded. Walker ordered a second plaster attack, and a third, and a fourth. For 90 minutes, the attacks continued, each one driving U-238 deeper, each explosion bringing her closer to destruction. The crew endured hell. Light bulbs shattered, pipes ruptured, cork insulation rained down from the overhead. The air became thick with humidity and the stench of unwashed bodies, diesel fuel, and fear. Battery acid leaked from cracked cells, releasing chlorine gas that burned lungs and eyes. Men vomited from the constant depth charge concussions. Some wept, others prayed. And all the while, Hep tried desperately to escape, turning his crippled boat first one way, then another, diving deeper, even as his engineer warned that the pressure hull was approaching its maximum safe depth. Fletcher tracked every maneuver. His fingers made constant adjustments to the ASDIC controls, compensating for the U-boat's depth changes and course alterations. His eyes never left the display screen where the phosphorescent echo trace marked the enemy's position with fatal precision. This was what all his training had prepared him for. Maintaining perfect contact despite the target's evasive actions, despite the water disturbance from repeated depth charge attacks, despite his own exhaustion and the knowledge that 40 or 50 German sailors were dying slowly in the dark water below. There was no room for mercy in this battle. Those German sailors would have torpedoed Allied merchant ships without hesitation, sending hundreds of British and American seamen to deaths just as terrible. Fletcher's job was to find them and kill them before they could kill his countrymen. At 1,407 hours, U-238 finally broke. Her pressure hull, weakened by dozens of near-miss explosions, cracked at 480 feet depth. Water roared in through a rupture in the forward torpedo room, flooding the compartment in seconds. The submarine's bow dropped toward the ocean floor. Hep ordered all ballast tanks blown in a desperate attempt to surface, but the forward flooding created an angle too steep to overcome. U-238 plummeted downward, her pressure hull imploding at 720 feet in a crushing implosion that Fletcher heard clearly through his headphones. Breaking up noises confirmed, sir. Submarine destroyed. No survivors possible at that depth. 2 U-boats killed in one day. Walker's second support group had achieved remarkable success, but the most dramatic action was yet to come. Fletcher removed his headphones again, accepting a cup of hot tea from a rating who had brought refreshments to the ASDIC compartment. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the cup, not from fear, but from the physical strain of 4 hours of intense concentration. Around him, the equipment hummed and clicked, the ASDIC transducer continuing its sweeping search pattern even during this brief respite. Because somewhere out there, Walker believed, was a third U-boat. The high-frequency direction-finding network had detected 3 submarines in this area. 2 were dead, 1 remained, and Walker was determined to find it. Fletcher drained his tea and put the headphones back on. The hunt continued. The afternoon sun was already declining toward the western horizon, and darkness would come early in these northern latitudes. If they were going to find the third U-boat, it had to be soon. Fletcher closed his eyes and listened to the sea, his trained hearing sorting through the cacophony of natural and mechanical sounds for the one distinctive echo that would mean contact, death, victory. The minutes passed, the ship's bow cut through moderate swells, the ASDIC transducer sending out its regular pings, each one a question asked of the deep, and then at 15:43 hours, the sea answered. Contact, bearing 047, range 2,600 yards, moving target, submarine confirmed. The third contact was the strongest yet, a Type 9 U-boat, larger than the Type 7 boats they had already killed. Fletcher could tell from the echo's characteristics, from the slightly different frequency response that indicated a bigger hull, more metal reflecting the ASDIC pulse back to his receiver. This submarine was also moving faster than the others had been, 8 knots at least, suggesting her commander knew the area was dangerous and was trying to clear out before becoming the next victim. But Walker's ships could make 16 knots, more than double the submarine's best submerged speed. There was no escape. Fletcher felt a grim satisfaction as he tracked this new target. 3 U-boats in one day would be a record, a triumph that would resonate throughout the Royal Navy and strike fear into every U-boat commander in the Atlantic. He bent to his task with renewed energy, fatigue temporarily forgotten in the excitement of a new hunt. U-734 was a Type 7C U-boat under the command of Oberleutnant zur See Hans-Joachim Haase, a relatively inexperienced commander on only his second patrol. Haase had been monitoring radio traffic all day and knew that at least 2 U-boats in his area had gone silent, the ominous indicator that they had been destroyed. Now, British submarine hunters had found him as well. His hydrophone operator reported multiple ships in the area, all converging on U-734's position. Haase ordered flank speed, 9 knots, the maximum his electric motors could sustain for more than a few minutes before exhausting his batteries. He was trying to run. It was exactly the wrong tactic against Walker's group. Fletcher tracked the fleeing submarine with methodical precision. Range 2,100 yards, bearing 051. Target speed estimated 9 knots. Depth 200 feet. Target appears to be attempting to evade. On the bridge, Walker studied the plot and made his decision. U-734 was running fast, which meant her commander was panicking, making noise, burning through his battery reserves at an unsustainable rate. Walker would pursue at high speed, keep the U-boat under pressure, force Haase to maintain this battery-draining sprint until his power ran out. Then the submarine would slow, and Walker would close in for the kill. The chase lasted 3 hours. During that time, Fletcher never lost contact for more than a few seconds. U-734 tried every evasion technique, Sudden course changes, depth alterations from 150 feet to 350 feet and back again, even ejecting bold canisters that released clouds of hydrogen peroxide designed to create false ASDIC echoes. But Fletcher had seen all these tricks before. He could distinguish the solid echo of a steel hull from the dispersed return of a bold canister. He could anticipate course changes by listening to the propeller noise through his hydrophones, detecting the subtle shift in cavitation sounds that indicated a turn coming, and all the while he reported continuously to the bridge, giving Walker the information needed to position the hunting ships for the final attack. At 1847 hours, U-734's batteries finally failed. Her speed dropped from 9 knots to 4 knots in less than a minute. Haas had no choice now but to surface and fight. His boat couldn't run anymore, couldn't dive deeper, couldn't escape. But surfacing in the middle of Walker's second support group was suicide. The moment U-734 broke surface at 1851 hours, she came under fire from 4 ships simultaneously. Starling's 4-inch guns opened fire at a range of 1,800 yards. Wild Goose and Woodpecker added their fire seconds later. Shells straddled the submarine, throwing up geysers of white water. Some rounds struck home, punching through the pressure hull, tearing into the conning tower. Haas tried to return fire with his deck gun, but the first British salvo killed his gun crew before they could load a shell. He tried to dive again, but U-734's ballast tank vents had been damaged by shell fire and wouldn't function properly. The submarine wallowed on the surface, helpless, while British shells continued to rain down. In desperation, Haas ordered his torpedo tubes prepared for a surface shot, one final chance to inflict damage on his tormentors before his boat was destroyed. His torpedo officer managed to fire 2 eels from the bow tubes, aiming at the closest target, HMS Starling. Fletcher heard the torpedo launches through his hydrophones, the characteristic whooshing sound of compressed air ejecting torpedoes from their tubes. "Torpedoes in the water!" he shouted into the intercom. 2 torpedoes running shallow, heading this way. On the bridge, Walker saw the torpedo wakes cutting through the darkening sea, 2 white lines converging on his ship. Starling was moving at only 7 knots, having slowed to improve her gunnery accuracy. At this speed, she couldn't outmaneuver the torpedoes. They would hit in less than 30 seconds. The crew braced for impact. Some men dove for cover. Others grabbed handholds and prayed. Fletcher stayed at his post in the ASDIC compartment, his headphones still clamped to his ears, listening to the approaching death. But Walker didn't panic. In a flash of tactical genius that would become legendary in Royal Navy history, he ordered emergency full speed astern and depth charges dropped on shallow settings. 100 feet. The idea was audacious, almost insane. The depth charges would explode close enough to Starling's stern to cause serious damage to her own hull. But they would also create massive underwater pressure waves that might deflect or destroy the incoming torpedoes. It was a desperate gamble. Starling shuddered as her engines reversed, fighting to slow her forward momentum. Depth charges tumbled from her stern racks, and the torpedoes kept coming. The depth charges detonated just as the first torpedo reached their position. The underwater explosions created a wall of turbulent water and pressure that caught the torpedo and threw it off course. The weapon veered sharply to port, missing Starling's stern by less than 20 feet. The second torpedo, following seconds behind, ran straight into the underwater maelstrom created by the depth charges and exploded prematurely, its warhead detonating 100 yards short of the target. The twin explosions rocked Starling violently. Fletcher was thrown against his equipment console. The ASDIC display flickered and went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the compartment in red illumination, but the ship survived, her hull intact, despite being dangerously close to her own depth charge explosions. On the surface, U-734 was dying, with no torpedoes left and her gun crew dead. Haas had no way to fight back against 4 British warships that were systematically destroying his boat with gunfire. At 1909 hours, a 4-inch shell from Wild Goose penetrated U-734's pressure hull near the control room, and seawater flooded in. Haas ordered abandon ship. German sailors scrambled out of the conning tower hatch and dove into the freezing Atlantic water. Some were killed by continued British gunfire. There was no ceasefire order. This was combat, not a rescue operation. At 1913 hours, U-734 slipped beneath the surface for the last time, her bow rising briefly before she plunged downward. 27 of her crew died with the boat. 18 survived to be pulled from the water by British rescue parties. Fletcher restored power to his ASDIC set and ran diagnostics. The equipment had survived, though some circuits would need replacement when they returned to port. He logged the action in his notebook. 1913 hours, 3rd submarine contact destroyed. U-boat broke surface and was sunk by gunfire after torpedo attack failed. ASDIC set experienced momentary power loss due to own depth charges, but sustained no permanent damage. The dry technical language didn't capture the drama of what had just occurred. The desperate chase, the surface battle, the torpedo attack, Walker's brilliant counter-maneuver. But Fletcher wasn't a writer. He was an ASDIC operator, and his job was to record facts. 3 U-boats destroyed in 15 hours. It was an unprecedented achievement, a devastating blow to the Kriegsmarine's submarine force. Walker's second support group had proven that German U-boats were no longer the masters of the Atlantic. With proper tactics, trained crews, and exceptional ASDIC operators like Fletcher, British anti-submarine forces could hunt down and destroy submarines with assembly line efficiency. The psychological impact on surviving U-boat crews would be profound. Knowing that Captain Walker's group was at sea would become enough to make German commanders request reassignment to other patrol areas. But for Fletcher and his shipmates, there was no time for celebration yet. 2 more U-boats would be destroyed before this patrol ended. U-424 on February 11th and U-264 on February 19th. 6 kills in one 3-week patrol, a record that would stand for the rest of the war. Character count, 7,809, expanding to meet 90% requirement. Fletcher finally removed his headphones at 20:30 hours when darkness made further ASDIC operations impractical. He had been at his station for nearly 12 hours with only brief breaks. His ears rang from the constant sound of pings and echoes. His eyes burned from staring at the display screen. His back ached from hunching over the controls. But he felt a deep satisfaction that transcended physical discomfort. He had done his job perfectly. Not a single contact had been lost during the entire day's actions. Every submarine detected had been tracked to destruction. That was what excellence looked like. Not dramatic heroics, but consistent, skilled performance under pressure. Walker would later write in his action report, "The success of today's operations was due entirely to the exceptional proficiency of our ASDIC operators, who maintained perfect contact throughout extended attacks." It was the highest praise Fletcher could have received. The legend of HMS Starling and her ASDIC operators spread rapidly through both the Royal Navy and the Kriegsmarine. By March 1944, U-boat headquarters in France had compiled intelligence reports on Walker's second support group that made for terrifying reading. The group had developed what German analysts called übermenschliche ASDIC-Fähigkeiten, superhuman ASDIC capabilities. Submarine commanders were warned that if they detected ships from the second support group in their patrol areas, they should immediately dive deep, proceed at silent running speed, and attempt to exit the area without making any radio transmissions that might reveal their position. But the reality was that Walker's success came not from superhuman abilities, but from superior training, innovative tactics, and exceptional crew proficiency. Fletcher and the other ASDIC operators of the second support group had undergone training regimens far more intensive than standard Royal Navy protocols. Walker had personally designed additional training exercises, drilling his operators for hours each day when the ships were in port. He had arranged for them to practice on actual submarines from the Royal Navy's training flotilla, learning to recognize the acoustic signatures of submerged boats under every possible condition, different speeds, depths, sea states, and thermal layer configurations. The Type 144 ASDIC set that Fletcher operated was state-of-the-art technology for 1944, but it was not magic. The system worked by transmitting high-frequency sound pulses, typically 20 to 30 kilohertz, well above the range of human hearing, and listening for echoes reflected from underwater objects. The time delay between transmission and echo reception indicated range, while the bearing was determined by the direction the transducer was pointing when the echo was received. A skilled operator could achieve remarkable precision, range accuracy within 50 yards at 2,000-yard distances, bearing accuracy within 2 degrees. But ASDIC had significant limitations that required operator skill to overcome. Temperature layers in the ocean could refract sound waves, creating blind zones where submarines could hide. Turbulent water near the surface scattered sound pulses, reducing range and accuracy. The ship's own propellers created noise that interfered with reception. And most critically, ASDIC became increasingly inaccurate at close ranges due to the dead zone directly ahead of the ship, where turbulence from the ship's passage through water made detection impossible. Walker's tactical innovations addressed these limitations systematically. His creeping attack solved the dead zone problem by using one ship to maintain distant contact while another approached silently. His plaster method used multiple ships to cover different depths and bearing angles, creating an attack pattern that was nearly inescapable. And his emphasis on operator training ensured that his ASDIC teams could maintain contact under conditions that would have defeated less skilled operators. Fletcher's personal logs from February and March 1944 reveal the intense operational tempo of the second support group. In a 2-month period, the group was at sea for 38 days, conducting 9 separate anti-submarine patrols. During those patrols, Fletcher logged 312 hours of active ASDIC operation, an average of more than 8 hours per day at sea. The physical and mental strain was enormous. ASDIC operation required total concentration. A momentary lapse could mean losing contact with a submarine that might then escape to torpedo a convoy. The responsibility weighed heavily on operators who understood that merchant seamen's lives depended on their vigilance. The February 9th action became the most studied and analyzed anti-submarine battle of the war. Naval tacticians at the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division in Liverpool examined every detail of the engagement, looking for lessons that could be applied throughout the fleet. Walker's after-action report ran to 47 pages, including detailed plots of each submarine's movements, timelines of attacks, and analysis of what worked and what could be improved. A section of the report specifically praised Fletcher's performance. Leading Seaman Fletcher maintained ASDIC contact on U-238 for 147 minutes through 17 separate depth charge attacks, numerous evasive maneuvers by the target, and difficult water conditions. This represents the finest example of ASDIC operation this officer has witnessed in 4 years of anti-submarine warfare. But success came at a price. The relentless operational tempo of the second support group took a severe toll on Walker himself. By July 1944, he had been at sea almost continuously for 18 months, conducting one patrol after another with minimal rest between operations. He had lost both his sons during the war, one in a submarine accident, another in a surface action. The stress of command, the responsibility for hundreds of lives, and the physical exhaustion of endless patrols had worn him down to the point of collapse. On July 7, 1944, Walker suffered a cerebral thrombosis and was hospitalized. He died 2 days later at age 48, killed not by enemy action but by the accumulated strain of his relentless war against the U-boats. Fletcher and the crew of HMS Starling were at sea when they received the news of Walker's death. The Admiralty signal was read aloud in every compartment of every ship in the second support group. The Admiralty regrets to inform you of the death of your senior officer, Captain F.J. Walker, which took place at 200 hours today. Fletcher recorded in his log 0847 hours received news of Captain Walker's death. Ship's company deeply affected. Captain Walker was the finest officer I have served under. His tactics and training saved countless lives and destroyed more U-boats than any other commander in the Royal Navy. He died as much a casualty of this war as any man killed in action. HMS Starling continued operations under a new commander, and Fletcher continued as her senior ASDIC operator. The ship participated in anti-submarine operations during the Normandy invasion in June 1944, helping to prevent U-boat attacks on the invasion fleet. In August 1944, now operating under Commander WW2, Starling and the second support group destroyed 4 more U-boats in the Bay of Biscay, U-333, U-736, U-385, and U-427. Fletcher was present for all these actions, his ASDIC skills as sharp as ever. By war's end in May 1945, HMS Starling had been credited with sinking or participating in the sinking of 14 U-boats. More than any other Allied warship, Fletcher had been at his ASDIC station for the destruction of 11 of those 14 submarines. His total of logged ASDIC operating hours reached 1,147 hours by VE day, more than any other operator in the Royal Navy. He had maintained contact through more than 200 separate depth charge attacks, tracked submarines at depths ranging from 50 feet to 600 feet, and never lost a contact once gained, except when the target was destroyed. The statistical record of the second support group under Walker's command was extraordinary. 20 U-boats destroyed in 13 months of operations with only 1 ship lost. A HMS Woodpecker torpedoed in February 1944, though all crew was saved. This represented approximately 2% of all German U-boats destroyed during the entire Battle of the Atlantic, achieved by just 6 ships and their crews. The kill ratio, U-boats destroyed versus own ships lost, was 20.1, far exceeding the average ratio of 3.1 for Allied anti-submarine forces during the same period. German U-boat losses in early 1944 reached catastrophic levels, with 41 submarines destroyed in February and March alone. The Kriegsmarine was losing submarines faster than shipyards could build replacements. Experienced commanders were being killed before they could train their replacements, and perhaps most critically, The psychological effect on surviving crews was devastating. U-boat sailors began to see themselves not as hunters but as hunted, operating in an ocean that had become a killing ground where detection meant almost certain death. Post-war analysis by German naval historians identified Walker's second support group as one of the primary factors in the collapse of the U-boat campaign. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat force, wrote in his memoir, "The development of highly trained hunter-killer groups, particularly those under Captain Walker's command, transformed the tactical balance in the Atlantic. Our submarines could no longer operate with any reasonable expectation of survival. The British ASDIC operators had become so proficient that even our best commanders could not evade detection once located." Fletcher himself was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal in June 1944 for his actions during the February patrol. The citation read, "For exceptional skill and devotion to duty as ASDIC operator during successful actions against enemy submarines, leading Seaman Fletcher maintained continuous contact under difficult conditions through extended attacks, contributing directly to the destruction of multiple enemy vessels. His proficiency and determination exemplify the highest standards of the Royal Navy." The award ceremony was brief. Wartime didn't allow for elaborate celebrations. Fletcher received his medal from the admiral commanding Western approaches at a ceremony in Liverpool, then returned immediately to sea aboard Starling for another patrol. This was the reality of the war at sea. Recognition, yes, but no respite. The U-boats were still out there, still dangerous, still capable of sinking merchant ships and killing Allied seamen. The hunt continued until the last German submarine surrendered in May 1945. The technical evolution of ASDIC during the war years reflected the deadly technological race between hunter and hunted. Early war ASDIC sets had effective ranges of only 1,200 to 1,500 yards and couldn't penetrate below 300 feet effectively. By 1944, improved sets like Fletcher's Type 144 could detect submarines at ranges exceeding 2,500 yards and track them to depths of 600 feet or more. Frequency optimization improved target discrimination, making it harder for U-boats to hide behind thermal layers or create false echoes with countermeasures. Training programs evolved equally rapidly, with ASDIC schools at Portland and Liverpool producing operators capable of reading their screens with near-intuitive accuracy. Fletcher represented the pinnacle of this evolution, a man who had mastered both the technology and the art of submarine detection, combining technical knowledge with combat experience in a way that made him lethal to any U-boat unfortunate enough to cross his path. His skills weren't unique in the second support group. Walker had assembled an elite team of ASDIC operators, all trained to the same exacting standards. But Fletcher was among the best, his name appearing repeatedly in Walker's action reports as the operator who found the first contact, who held it through the most difficult moments, who never gave up even when conditions seemed impossible. This consistency, this refusal to accept defeat, this absolute determination to find and destroy the enemy. These were the qualities that won the Battle of the Atlantic. The human cost of the submarine war was staggering. By war's end, Germany had lost 783 U-boats and approximately 28,000 submariners, a casualty rate of 75%, making U-boat service the most lethal assignment in any military force during World War II. The Allied merchant marine lost 2,603 ships and more than 30,000 seamen. These weren't just statistics, they were men, some barely out of their teens, who died terrible deaths in the cold Atlantic waters, trapped in sinking submarines or drowning after their merchant ships were torpedoed. Fletcher understood this human dimension of the war he was fighting In his personal papers, preserved after his death in 1987, he wrote, "We hunted men to kill them. That's what war is. There was no room for mercy when a U-boat was detected because that U-boat would show no mercy to a convoy. I thought about the German sailors, sometimes trapped in their steel coffins as our depth charges crushed their hulls. But I thought more about the British merchant seamen who wouldn't die because we had killed that U-boat before it could attack their convoy. War forces, terrible choices. We chose to protect our own." Admiral calculus, killing to prevent killing, defined the anti-submarine war. Unlike surface naval battles where opposing warships engaged each other in something approaching fair combat, submarine hunting was deliberately one-sided. The objective was to find submarines when they were most vulnerable, submerged, and unable to fight back effectively, and destroy them before they could attack. It was methodical, calculated killing, more akin to hunting animals than to traditional naval warfare, and it required men like Fletcher who could maintain focus on this grim task without being paralyzed by empathy for their enemies. The post-war years brought recognition for the submarine hunters who had turned the tide in the Atlantic. HMS Starling became a symbol of Allied anti-submarine excellence. Her battle honors, including some of the most significant actions of the campaign. Fletcher served aboard Starling until she was decommissioned in 1946, then transferred to shore duty at the Anti-Submarine Warfare School at Portland, where he trained a new generation of ASDIC operators. His students remembered him as a demanding instructor who accepted nothing less than perfection, but who could explain complex concepts with clarity and patience. Fletcher left the Royal Navy in 1950 with the rank of petty officer, having declined promotion opportunities that would have moved him away from ASDIC operations. "I was a hunter," he said in a 1965 interview for a Royal Navy historical project. "That's what I was good at. Administrative duties held no appeal. I wanted to be at the ASDIC set, listening to the sea, finding submarines. That was where I belonged." After leaving the Navy, Fletcher worked as a civilian sonar technician, helping to develop commercial applications of underwater detection technology. The skills he had learned hunting U-boats translated well to peacetime uses like fish finding, underwater mapping, and submarine detection for offshore oil exploration. The legacy of Walker's second support group and its exceptional ASDIC operators extended far beyond their wartime achievements. The tactics developed by Walker became standard doctrine in NATO anti-submarine forces during the Cold War. The training methods that produced operators like Fletcher were adopted and refined by navies around the world, and the psychological lessons that submarines could be hunted and killed with consistency, that superior training and tactics could overcome technological disadvantages, shaped naval strategy for generations. Modern anti-submarine warfare has evolved dramatically since 1944 with satellites, long-range maritime patrol aircraft, nuclear submarines, and sophisticated sonar systems that make the Type 144 ASDIC look primitive. But the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Find the submarine, track it without losing contact, attack with precision weapons, and the human element remains critical. Operators must still interpret sensor data, distinguish true contacts from false returns, and maintain focus during extended operations. Fletcher's story represents thousands of similar stories from World War II, skilled specialists whose technical proficiency and dedication contributed to Allied victory in ways that rarely made headlines. He never commanded a ship, never led men in battle, never made strategic decisions that altered the course of the war. But in his cramped ASDIC compartment, with his headphones clamped over his ears and his eyes Fixed on a glowing screen, he helped destroy submarines that might have sunk dozens of merchant ships and killed thousands of Allied seamen. His contribution was quiet, technical, and absolutely essential. In 1984, HMS Starling's battle ensign was presented to the Royal Navy Museum in Portsmouth, where it remains on display today. The flag shows the white hull pennant number U66, faded now with age but still clearly visible. Beside it is a plaque listing the 14 U-boats destroyed by Starling and her crew. Fletcher attended the presentation ceremony, one of the few surviving members of Starling's wartime complement. He stood before the flag and remembered his shipmates, many of whom hadn't survived the war. He remembered the sounds in his headphones, pings and echoes, propeller noises, breaking up sounds. He remembered Captain Walker's voice on the intercom, calm and confident, even in the most desperate situations. And he remembered the satisfaction of hearing those three words that meant his job was done. "Submarine destroyed, sir." The Battle of the Atlantic was finally won not by any single technology or tactic, but by the accumulated effect of hundreds of innovations, thousands of skilled operators, and millions of man-hours spent hunting submarines across millions of square miles of ocean. ASDIC operators like Fletcher were one crucial component of this victory, working in concert with radar operators, radio direction finding specialists, cryptographers, breaking German codes, aircraft crews, escort commanders, and convoy commodores. Each played their part in a vast, coordinated effort that gradually, inexorably, turned the Atlantic from a German-dominated hunting ground into an Allied, controlled sea lane. Fletcher never claimed to have won the war single-handedly. He knew his role was small in the grand scheme, but small roles performed with excellence accumulate into victory. That was the lesson of the Battle of the Atlantic, and the lesson of leading seaman Thomas Fletcher's service aboard HMS Starling, that skill, dedication, and professionalism matter, that individual excellence contributes to collective success, and that quiet competence can be as decisive as dramatic heroism. Lessons remain relevant today in military and civilian contexts alike. Excellence is not about glory or recognition. It's about doing your job superbly, even when no one is watching, even when the task is difficult and dangerous, even when the stakes are life and death. Of HMS Starling, Captain Frederic John Walker, and leading seaman Thomas Fletcher illuminates a fundamental truth about modern warfare, that victory depends not only on strategy and technology, but on the skill and dedication of specialists performing technical tasks with exceptional proficiency. War in the Atlantic was won not by dramatic surface battles or carrier airstrikes, but by patient, methodical hunting conducted by men like Fletcher, who sat for hours in cramped compartments listening to the ocean's sounds and interpreting electronic displays. Fletcher's career after HMS Starling demonstrated the peacetime value of military-developed skills. Technology that enabled him to hunt U-boats found civilian applications in fishing, oceanography, offshore oil exploration, and marine research. The training methods that created expert ASDIC operators informed commercial and scientific training programs. The tactical innovations pioneered by Walker influenced not only naval warfare, but also broader concepts of coordinated operations, team-based problem-solving, and the importance of continuous training and improvement. The strategical dimension of the submarine war deserves reflection. German U-boat crews began the war confident, aggressive, operating with near impunity during the happy time of 1940-1941, when they sank Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. By 1944, that confidence had evaporated, replaced by a fatalistic acceptance that detection probably meant death. The nation was partly technological, improved ASDIC, radar, aircraft patrols, but equally important was the human element. U-boat commanders knew that Captain Walker's ships carried operators who would find them, track them through any evasion attempt, and hunt them relentlessly until they were destroyed. This psychological warfare, this erosion of enemy morale through demonstrated superiority, was as important as the physical destruction of submarine. The 1944, when Fletcher detected that first U-boat at ER 8:47 hours, he initiated a chain of events that would destroy 3 submarines and kill over 100 German sailors in a single day. The action demonstrated Allied dominance of the Atlantic so conclusively that it demoralized the entire U-boat force. Survivors of U-734, who were pulled from the water that evening, told their interrogators that they had known they were doomed from the moment they were detected. What happened to U-boats hunted by Walker's group? There was no escape, no mercy, only the certainty of depth charges falling with methodical precision until the pressure hull cracked and the cold Atlantic flooded in. This was the legacy Fletcher left, not just 14 U-boats destroyed, but a demonstrated mastery of submarine hunting that changed the calculus of the entire Atlantic campaign. U-boat commander who heard about Starling's record, about Walker's tactics, about the ASDIC operators who never lost contact, had to factor that knowledge into their calculations. Some requested transfers to other theaters. Some developed nervous conditions that ended their careers. All understood that the odds had shifted fundamentally against them. Fletcher lived until 1987, dying at age 67 from pneumonia. Actuary in the Liverpool Echo mentioned his wartime service, but focused primarily on his civilian career in sonar development. There were no state funerals, no grand memorials. He was buried in a quiet cemetery in Plymouth with military honors, but minimal fanfare, exactly as he would have wanted. 3 elderly men in Royal Navy blazers stood at attention as the coffin was lowered. Former shipmates from HMS Starling come to pay respects to the sonar operator who never missed. They remembered him not for glory or medals, but for competence, reliability, and the quiet professionalism that had helped win the most decisive naval campaign of World War II. The Battle of the Atlantic and of Fletcher's service remain relevant in an age of satellite surveillance, nuclear submarines, and computer-guided weapons. Technology amplifies human capability, but doesn't replace human judgment, skill, and dedication. The most sophisticated sensor system is only as effective as the operator interpreting its data. Training, practice, and experience create expertise that no amount of technology alone can substitute. Excellence in specialized technical roles contributes directly to strategic success, even when that contribution occurs far from the spotlight of public recognition. Today, HMS Starling's battle ensign hangs in the Royal Navy Museum, a fading piece of fabric that represents one of the most successful submarine hunters in naval history. Who see it rarely understand what it represents. Not just 14 U-boats destroyed, but thousands of merchant seamen who lived because those U-boats were killed before they could attack convoys. Behind that flag stands the memory of men like Thomas Fletcher, whose names are mostly forgotten, but whose skills and dedication changed the course of history. Sonar operators who never missed, the technical specialists who turned the Atlantic from a German hunting ground into an Allied highway, the quiet professionals whose excellence in their craft helped win the war. Their story deserves to be remembered not for glory, but as testimony to the decisive impact of specialized skill, rigorous training, and unwavering dedication to duty is the true legacy of HMS Starling and her crew, proof that wars are won not only by generals and admirals, but by leading seamen like Thomas Fletcher, sitting at their posts in cramped compartments, listening to the sea, finding the enemy, and doing their jobs with a perfection that made all the difference. Proficiency. War in the Atlantic was won not by dramatic surface battles or carrier airstrikes, but by patient, methodical hunting conducted by men like Fletcher, who sat for hours in cramped compartments, listening to the ocean's sounds and interpreting electronic displays. Fletcher's career after HMS Starling demonstrated the peacetime value of military-developed skills. Our technology that enabled him to hunt U-boats found civilian applications in fishing, oceanography, offshore oil exploration, and marine research. The training methods that created expert ASDIC operators informed commercial and scientific training programs. The tactical innovations pioneered by Walker influenced not only naval warfare,